This video was long overdue, but here are even more pro tips to help you get better at Pokemon Reborn. In fact, I'm not even going to waste time with any more bullshit, let's just get right into this. The first pro tip is that X items are ridiculously broken. Even before they got buffed to a +2 boost, they were among the better items that you could invest in order to bail yourself out of some of the tougher gym battles. But as they are now, they are even more broken. You can't even really access them freely to buy until you get 7 department store stickers, if I recall correctly. But you can still find quite a few as invisible items, which is a pro tip in the first video. So if you're adhering to that tip, then you should be able to gather up a few X items on your own. And those will definitely be of use to you if you know how to strategize around them. As for the point in time when you can access them freely, technically it is possible to get those before you go to a gate city and are cut off from Reborn City, but it's pretty difficult given that you literally have to get every single department store sticker before that point in order to get X items. And it is worth your time, but at the same time a couple of those events for those stickers are kind of tedious to get because they involve certain weather conditions that are kind of just random and you can't control it all that well. But as soon as you get back to Reborn City, you should definitely be able to buy X items and make use of them to absolutely trivialize some of the major battles in the late game. Second pro tip. I feel like a lot of players, even veterans to Pokemon Reborn, really sleep on a lot of the early game, short-term Pokemon that evolve early but ultimately don't have the stats to really go the distance for the rest of the game. But what these players don't realize is that the early game of Pokemon Reborn is arguably, in my opinion, the hardest part of the game. So it's worth using these kinds of Pokemon when they're at their prime in order to make your life 10 times easier and in order to enable you to progress faster into the areas of the game or the points in the game where you can access stronger Pokemon. I'm talking about Pokemon like Mightyena, Butterfree, Seaking, and Swoobat. These are all examples of Pokemon that players often shaft because they don't see them as long-term party members. Well, not every Pokemon you train has to have long-term potential, and I would say that it saves even more time to train these Pokemon and get through the early stages of the game quickly than trying to bust past with Pokemon that you feel have long-term potential but don't evolve for a long time. In order to illustrate my point, compare a Pokemon like Mightyena to Tynamo. Pretty much 9 out of 10 players will concede that Electros is a much better Pokemon long-term than Mightyena, but Mightyena can evolve before even facing Julia. Meanwhile, Tynamo is not going to even evolve into its second evolution until you get to Shade, at least. So Tynamo spends over 4 gyms being a useless Pokemon while Mightyena is holding its weight throughout that entire period. Noibat spends at least 5 gyms unevolved unless you common candy abuse, while Swoobat is busting through teams by the second gym. These are just things you have to consider when choosing party members. Now, to be fair, Pokemon Reborn is still a very back-ended game, as it is now. Which is to say that we're getting into the level 90s now in terms of progression. So that means that Pokemon that get powerful a little later than most are actually spending more time being good than those early game Pokemon. But that still doesn't really take away the fact that during those first 3 or 4 gyms, these kinds of Pokemon are your best fighters for that period of time. So you may as well use them. And I actually got a little ahead of myself when commenting about common candying Noibat because that's actually the next pro tip. Common candies are way more useful than you think. With access to these, you can freely overlevel your Pokemon and then level them back down to access certain evolutions and moves that would otherwise be just out of your reach for certain major battles. So for example, your level cap for Shelly is 35, right? But if you have Combuskin as a starter, you can go ahead and level him to level 36, have him become Blaziken, and then level back down below the level cap, and have a stronger Pokemon for your fight against Shelly. A personal anecdote that comes to mind when talking about common candies is when I got Pawniard as the Mystery Egg. In order to make him more useful for the fight against Sarah, I went ahead and evolved him early by over-leveling him to level 52. So I got Bisharp just in time for my gym battle against Sarah, and then later on I over-leveled to 57 before Noelle in order to get Iron Head for his Clefable, and then of course leveled him back down to the level cap of 55. So if you haven't been doing stuff like this already, I would definitely recommend you take the 5 seconds to check Bulbapedia for your Pokemon's move lists and evolution levels, and see if you can't apply some more strategic use of common candies in the future. Now, this next pro tip is actually one that I have trouble adhering to a lot of the times, due to my massive OCD. But don't fret over minor typing overlaps, and you should definitely not let that get in the way of you using good Pokemon. And what I mean is that, like for example, if you already have a Swampert on your team, but you also have the chance to get an Excadrill, you should just use both, because they're both good Pokemon. And even though they're both ground types, they're different enough that they're not redundant. Like, there's definitely a few Pokemon out there, well, a lot of Pokemon out there, that are redundant with each other. Like, you don't want to have Arcanine and Rapidash on the same team unless you're using them both for a specific battle. Likewise, I wouldn't over worry about having overlapping weaknesses, because that's probably unwarranted again, except for a few certain major battles here and there. So if you have 3 ice weaknesses and no resistances, you would be surprised how little that comes up. As long as your team can kill shit quickly, it's probably fine. Offense is definitely your best defense in Pokemon Reborn, which is why I'm also a huge advocate for X items. That's it for the major pro tips, but I have 3 more that are a little bit more specific and niche and minor, and I will try to run through them quickly and briefly. Nature Power is pretty awesome in Pokemon Reborn. For some reason, it's still the second TM that you get from a gym battle, and it can be invaluable coverage for Pokemon that generally lack it, such as Superior. So yeah, try it out, experiment with it. You can get some pretty crazy results depending on which field effect you're in. Pickup is really cool in the early game on a Pokemon like Zigzagoon, and can get you some pretty crazy good items to either sell or use yourself. And lastly, try not to hoard consumables. Even if you think they're rare, they're there for you to use. So if you're thinking you might need to use that Focus Sash that you picked up, then it's probably worth it. So quit being a pussy and stop losing the Garchomp and Arceus.
Hello! Oh! Hey, what the fuck? That young